Hello and welcome everybody. This is Kevin Donovan, Chief Architect Forum, and this is the Chief Architect Forum News with Bryce. Bryce, how you doing?
Doing great, Kevin. Um, I understand you had a little bit of time off. It's great to have you back. And we're
Yeah.
right in to discuss three really cool topics today. So, the first one, we want to talk about photonic processors. So, a lot of people don't know what's happening there. There's been some huge advances in the area that we're gonna dive into. The second thing we want to look at is the enterprise architecture management tool space. Like, wow, is that a hotbed of activity? I mean, stuff is happening there. And the final discussion will be around the Amazon Web Services business to business data integration platform. Kevin, let's start with the first photonic processor. So, this is a company called QAnt. They've developed the world's first, I think, commercially viable photonic chip. They anticipate that this chip will be about 30 times more energy efficient than current chips that are being produced for, let's say, things like large language models. How does the chip work? Well, essentially, the computation is very fast. It occurs at the speed of light, and the chip is actually like a waveguide for the light. You can almost think of this like I'm uniquely positioned, but my glasses are actually a photonic computer, right? Like when that goes through the lens, you can look at this as a fast Fourier transform, and it transforms the image to reach my eyeballs. And if now you imagine, controlling the attributes of that lens with voltages at a micro scale, it gives you an idea of how this works. So you basically have a substrate. I think they're using lithium niobate for that. You shine the light through it, and it does this computation in real time. It's truly an analog process. And then it connects at the other end to traditional computing power to interpret the results. So very fast. And the other final thing, which is really interesting, I'd like to get your thoughts on, they're able, so the light frequencies are very particular where you need to go to prevent lossless, interactions. Because if it's too lossy, then your light just dissipates. It turns out that the old CMOS foundries that were sort of many have been abandoned are now the perfect size to build a photonic chip. So we not only have the benefit of this new technology, but a whole slew of all pre-existing CMOS foundries that could be repurposed. What do you think of that one?
Well, I have to admit, this is another time where you're pulling something out of the hat that I know almost nothing about.
Right on. Okay.
Photonic-based processors
Yes.
leveraging light instead of electrons for compute. That's yeah. Um, I mean, what did you say? 30x energy efficiency
30
and
times the 30 times the
speed?
efficiency, and the speed is very fast, right?
Yeah.
So it's the speed of light, literally, right? And chips don't compute near the speed of light, of course. They have a whole different mechanism that at work there. So this is very fast, very energy efficient, very scalable in a sense, right? Like like once you built the technology, we can build larger chips now that work on this. It
Yeah.
turns out there's only one substance, this lithium niobate, which actually forms the substrate to essentially form the lens, in the metaphor that the light
Yeah.
goes through to get computed.
Gotcha.
Very exciting stuff.
Interesting. I mean, I suppose photonics disrupting traditional semiconductor architectures is a long way off, but it's interesting what what the implications would be for AI workloads and things like that. I mean, at some point the next evolution may not be algorithmic. It may be in the compute.
Well,
The hardware may be more important than the software.
well, actually, Kevin, I would argue, I think you hit something really important. I think we're going to see a point where architects need to embrace what's happening at that layer, that physical layer, much more than we've had to. Like in the past, it's all been decoupled. You don't
Yeah.
really, like an application guy isn't going to get too worried about the infrastructure.
No.
And I think when you start moving to some of these AI things now,
Mhm.
we start talking large language models, photonics, we talked about thermodynamic computing. I think it's going to require a knowledge of what is the best approach and what does it mean? Because I also think that some of these approaches are going to restrict the types of algorithms that are useful for each type of computing substrate.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the bottleneck isn't software anymore. It's becoming physics.
It's becoming physics. And now talk about the physics of a situation. I think an area that you're a little bit closer to. Um, we're seeing lots of merger activity in the enterprise architecture tool management space. So we've seen Orbis, acquire Capsify. SAP has bought
Yeah.
LeanIX. We talked on our show about Mega and Biz Design, and all these guys getting combined. Kevin, what is happening? And is
Yeah,
this a
it's
big deal?
interesting. I mean, consolidation is not a surprise, but I wasn't really that cognizant of the size of the market. This is like a $1.1 billion market, apparently. Enterprise architecture management tools. And yeah,
Wow.
the Gartner quadrants or Forrester waves were getting a little busy. They were getting
Yes.
a little full. There had been some merger and acquisition activity, but not a lot. But yes, all of a sudden, SAP seeing how EA is driving a lot of transformation and decision making, and so thinking, well, maybe we'll pick up LeanIX. They're another fine piece of German software. Orbis picking up Capsify, as you mentioned. I think Ardoc, but Shiftx, which is a smaller, a
Yep.
bit of a niche, but still Ardoc not being being a fairly new player also. And then, as you mentioned, the thing that we've referred to twice previously, Biz Design having orchestrated this merger acquisition with both Mega and their HopeX platform, and then Software AG's Alphabet. Not all of Software AG, but Software AG just
Software AG Alphabet, and
spinning
and
off
actually,
the Alphabet product.
and also we have, I think, some of the more boutique, manufacturers, or maybe that's not the right word, but regional. In the Netherlands, they have their own Value Blue, for instance,
Yeah, sure.
which
Yeah,
is
we're talking
which
right.
is another interesting player.
Yeah.
And it's really, I think, pointing to the widespread adoption of enterprise management frameworks. And the big question is, are we ready for this? And is there any strategy that somebody can follow if I've, say, been with Biz Design and then I find myself being bought up by Mega? This is going to cause some ripples. People may have chosen one for features, right? And now, do you think there's going to be a lot of going back to the market, or do you see that a lot of people will just sort of live with the path that they're put on? Oh, I'm with Biz Design now. Mega's here. I surrender. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the go-to-market for these different companies and what they're trying to do with the acquisition. I've spoken with some people at Biz Design, so I have a little bit of insight into what they're doing. They plan on keeping Biz Design's Horizon, Mega's HopeX, and Alphabet as separate platforms. So if you're on that for like the next at least 5, if not 7 years. So if that's where you're invested and everything runs on that for you, that's fine. They'll make a migration path for you, but at the same time, they want to try and pluck out and make a kind of best of suite offering, a next generation platform that will be leveraging pieces and tools of the underlying platforms. Um, I think that, I would imagine Orbis will do similar things. Ardoc will do similar things. SAP, I think, is going to be very hands off. They've always had a lot of tight integrations with LeanIX. I think LeanIX was looking for an exit through SAP's acquisition, but
Interesting.
I don't anticipate they will do a lot to change LeanIX. They're on a good trajectory as they are, I would say. So I don't think you need to be looking for what's next or where to go next. But for me, the kind of the takeaway is really just that people are seeing more and more the value and importance of having an EA tool. I've been many places. You probably have also where, yeah, here's our EA repository. It's an Excel sheet. Okay. We'll start there.
Well, let's call the, the moose out on the table here, as we say in Canada.
Yeah.
And, and, it's interesting because I've been in a lot of organizations, say 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and their attitude is these tools are too heavy to provide value.
Yeah.
They're too top heavy. And we're seeing that shift now to the adoption of these tools. And I'm going to put out there, I don't know what the annual growth rate is, like year after year, but I'm gonna bet that we're going to see more widespread adoption. And the paradox to me is that what I've also seen is people that adopt these tools without proper architecture training, without understanding something like the Bittabach or the open group framework. Not that you want to necessarily use them, but their ideas come from these tools, right? Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people get really frustrated because they're not familiar with that. And so I'm almost forecasting a wave of demand and maybe being able to accelerate the adoption of these tools and also to train architects to use them. What are your thoughts, Kevin?
Great point. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that there is increasing demand for these, and people are seeing the demand and recognizing, yeah, okay, things are getting too complex. We can't just do this in, Excel and talk about it in PowerPoint. We need a tool, which, I've been saying for a long time, but yeah, it was falling on deaf ears for a while. But you're certainly right that, when you are adopting, it's not all senior architects in the room. There's people from everywhere. And, I have been on multiple calls where, the entire group of 15 people discussed what is an application. And it's going to take some background knowledge, some training, some introduction, some adaptation. There's going to have to be adoption and workshops to kind of fit these things in so that they deliver the value that they're promising and that organizations hope to get. Yeah, I think you're right.
Great point. Now we go on to the third item, which is particularly interesting. So Amazon Web Services has introduced a business-to-business data interchange platform. It roughly uses an API-based paradigm. And it also makes available the ability to transfer EDI-based documents, which is huge. So it allows, on the one hand, the ability to, integrate with your legacy world and support things like EDI, but it's also a competitor to a lot of the middleware platforms in that it supports an API-based framework, which I think this is something that the industry's been waiting for. I think it's a huge advance, right? It helps us connect cloud native systems and also potentially reduce costs for things like EDI and maybe even shift out of the existing ADI value-added network providers onto the cloud, which I think is a huge move.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, an interesting move that they're looking to automate EDI transactions to, simplify legacy integrations, and that the whole thing is being driven by low code tooling, I think is going to be pretty attractive, because that's been a mess, for a long time. It's been a difficult job and very brittle integrations. And that's interesting that they're taking a swing at, this is really not a very sexy area, but certainly a very essential business problem, EDI. So yeah, they could, maybe finally drag B2B transactions, into the cloud native era. So that it's an interesting point.
Well, let me stop there. There's one comment I do want to challenge. I think that with the introduction of these platforms, I think this is I don't know if this is your intent, but I think it's very sexy. And having an integration course available on some of these things, this is really timely, right? So,
but Bryce, we'll bring who has an integration course available?
Yes, we do.
Oh, we do?
Have one. We have one, yes. And I
shameless plug.
And it's aimed at architects, so it does go right to development of, a little bit to understand the concepts, but it's really from an architectural perspective, what do I need to get integrations in place? And it's interesting because this is something a lot of architects, they get thrust into these areas, not sure of the best practices. This is a great course to touch base. Like we've talked to, various people like Chevron, Boeing, Microsoft, gathered those best practices starting in 2020. And now when you see something like this occur, I get really excited because it's moving towards, in this case, leveraging what we know about APIs and extending that knowledge about API gateways and fabrics and what we need to do there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly going to affect traditional EDI providers,
Yes.
the value-added, providers, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially even though they're low-code interfaces that they're looking to put out there, it will need to be architected well, and you'll need to be thinking about enterprise integration. And if you don't know a lot about that, talk to Bryce.
Thank you. Kevin, thank you. I encourage everybody who's listening, please, we need to get more comments. We need to get your input. Is there any news story that you want us to explore? Let us know in the messaging, or if you found something interesting, let us know. It really helps us to direct the content, whether you message below or in some cases, I think we've mainly received like inbox messages up to this point. But again, if we get a dialogue going, I think that's just a great place to go. And the other thing that I'm looking at, I'd like to hear any thoughts. Is there interest in an integration architecture special interest group to meet? I would love to get your feedback on that. So if you can, message below, inbox me or Kevin, and we'd love to get your thoughts going forward. Kevin, thank you. As usual, a great session today. I really appreciate the time.
You bet. Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.